Christ is in our midst. We've heard two Gospels this morning. The first one that we heard is the one for the Sunday after Pentecost that we're at, the one I'm going to speak on. Second one from St. Luke's Gospel was for two saints, particularly today, St. Athanasius, the monk of Mount Athos, and also St. Sergius of Radonezh, whose relics were translated. We commemorate the translation or the transfer of his relics from one place to another this day. But as I said, I want to talk about this first gospel from St. Matthew. It's the gospel, very famously, the gospel of the pigs. And if you grew up on a farm with animals, or in my case, my dear wife has just got us a dairy cow and calf, and we now have these two lumbering beasts just outside of our front window. We also have chickens. You realize that animals, especially farm animals, and this for the most part is the sorts of animals that would have been known in the time of Christ, in the ancient world, they're very different than the cute and the cuddly and the warm and the fuzzy ones that sit on our couches and on our laps and that we take out and dress in little booties and put coats on and all those kind of things, our dogs and our cats. Animals are a different thing in the scriptures than we city people tend to make of them. So I want to talk a little bit about that difference because I think, this is a very dramatic gospel, right? We have this man who's in many ways behaving like a wild beast because he's possessed by these demons. We have Christ coming and speaking to these demons, and they respond to him and they have a conversation. And then we get these pigs that the demons enter and they rush down the slope and are drowned. And I think we city folks is our reaction not a little bit of, oh, the piggies, oh, the poor piggies, why did Jesus do that to the piggies? We tend to think in these kind of sentimental terms, I think, about animals, because again, the ones that we tend to know are the ones that, lap milk from a dish and sit on our laps in our house. We're used to them being very friendly, domestic, in the house sorts of creatures. And again, this is simply not the case. In the Old Testament, or in the world of the scriptures, and indeed in the whole ancient world, and really the whole world before modern urbanization and modern mechanism, animals were seen very differently. They were seen as part of God's beautiful and good creation, but they had a place in that creation. We, as human beings, have a place in it. Everything else has a place in it. But that place was very clearly defined. I'll give you a version of what basically passed for, you could call this zoology, maybe the zoology of the ancient world, and it went something like this, that the way that you understand the world is by starting at the bottom of things that are created. And the very most simple and basic things that have been created are inanimate matter, rocks, things that have no, rocks, soil, the earth, things that have no life in them. And then you go up this chain of created things, or this chain of being, and the next thing that you come to is you come to the plants. And plants, of course, have a material, substantial existence, but they also have life. They grow, they do things. You step up that chain one more step, and you come to the animals. You come to the piggies. And they have material reality, like the earth. They have life, like plants, but added to that is something more. They have consciousness. Animals look about, they respond to their environment, they do things in relationship to their environment. Then we get a great gap, and the next link in this chain of being is us, human beings. We too have physical material bodies. We too have life, physical life. We too have consciousness, that is, we take in the world around us. But we have something that distinguishes us radically from everything below, and that is the breath of God, the Spirit of God, the image of God in which we have been made, which resides in the soul that has been placed into our material bodies, this immortal dimension that is the image of God within us, and which includes both our ability to worship and to know God. It includes our reason, our ability to think. This is how the ancient world understands these things. Everything is good. The rocks are good, the plants are good, the animals are good, and humans are good, but there's a radical difference, and human beings, by virtue of being closer to God, by bearing a seed of the immortal life of God within them, are seen as the most important aspects of creation. St. Gregory of Nyssa points out how it is that in the book of Genesis, we see that human beings are created out of dust, we're created out of earth, and we're created out of the breath of the Spirit. It's these two things brought together, and he says we are creatures that inhabit the mean, or that is, we live in the middle. We're in the middle between earth and matter and the divine and spirit. That's what it is to be a human being, says St. Gregory, and so as do many of the fathers. The goal then is that the things in us, our material bodies, our material life, the things that we share with the plants and the rocks and the animals, are meant to serve and to be supportive of the thing that is placed in us by God. Our bodies are meant to serve our souls and our minds. This is how we are meant to be. This is how human beings were meant to function. And we see this most perfectly in the Holy Theotokos, who offers most perfectly and with utmost holiness her physical existence, her human bodily life to God, and as a result of that offering of that part of herself to God, she becomes able to bear the divine Christ within her. This is what human beings were created to do. Sin, of course, steps in, and sin is always depicted in the scriptures and in the fathers as a fall. So we are meant to ascend to God. Sin lowers us. St. Gregory says that sin is like a weight. It pulls us down. And you've probably felt this when you're mired in your own sins or where there's sins that you can't overcome. They feel like a weight. They feel like something that drags you down from God. It's something that lowers us and tends to turn us to pay attention to the lower aspects of ourselves, our animal nature, our animal bodies, and to subject our souls to those, so that we spend our time running around figuring out how to get the most comfortable couch, instead of thinking of what we could do with our minds in worshiping God and serving others, and these kind of things. St. John Chrysostom likens this explicitly to the animal kingdom. He's speaking to his congregation, and he says, when people live in sin, they become like animals. And he says, when I see you living an irrational life, how am I to call you a human being and not an ox? When I see you robbing others, how am I to call you a human being and not a wolf? When I see you committing fornication, how am I to call you a human being and not a swine? When I see you being fraudulent, how am I to call you a human being and not a serpent? In every case, says St. John, sin makes us animal-like. It lowers us. It takes us away from what we are supposed to be. Now, not to blame the animals, and St. John is very good at this, as is St. Gregory, who says, we human beings, though, animals do these things by instinct. When we use our minds and our souls to cooperate with sin, we become worse than the animals. St. Gregory says that our love of pleasure took its beginning from our being made like to the animals, having this animal nature. And so, but when we pair that with our mind, we do things that the animals never do. When we feel anger or fear, the way an animal might, we don't just feel fear, but we add to it conspiracy, envy, deceit, hypocrisy, all of these things. When we feel greed, like a pig might like to, says St. Gregory, we don't just desire something, but we become covetous. We plot to take from others. So we use our minds to become worse than the animals. This is the basic problem. And this is what we see in today's gospel. This man who has become like an animal. St. Matthew doesn't emphasize this as much, but in St. Luke's telling of the gospel, he shows how it is that this is very explicitly, this man is behaving like an animal. He's naked, he lives in the wilderness, the people have tried to tie him up, says St. Luke. In every way, he's become like an animal through the influence of these demons. He's become like the pigs among whom he lives, and an animal that for the Old Testament is an unclean animal, an animal that the Jews were not to keep and were not to have. Well, what happens when Christ encounters him? He comes and he sees this man, and his care is for this man who has become less than he was created to be. He casts out the demons that have entered into him through his sin. He shows them and the sin that the demons and the sin that they inspire to be subhuman, to be dehumanizing, and he sends them into something that is more representative of what these demons are trying to do. He sends them into the swine, these creatures, which again for the Jews are sinful. You're not to have these creatures. So it's a fitting thing for Christ to do this, even though we might say, oh, the poor piggies. But what Christ is trying to demonstrate here in this miracle is to show this is what a human being is. And he's freeing us from being like the irrational, the animals without souls. And what is the result? This man, again, St. Luke emphasizes this more than St. Matthew does, is no longer a wild animal. Rather, he's clothed, says St. Luke. He's sitting. Sitting in the presence of Christ is a sign of his own confidence, a sign of his being the master of himself, that he now uses his mind and his soul to rule over and to guide his body rather than the other way around. He's seated, and, says both St. Matthew and St. Luke, he is in his right mind. He's no longer delusional in the way that he was. He's no longer subjecting his mind to these animal-like inclinations. This is exactly what St. John Chrysostom says that the church gives to us. And he speaks about the people that he's speaking to his congregation and to the people that he's bringing into the church. How do you become a human being? Well, if you keep the thoughts of the flesh under control, those animal thoughts, if you expel lewd habits, if you expel greed for money and the other passions. And how do you become a human being? By coming here to the church where human beings are created. If I receive you as a wild stallion, I turn you in the church into a human being. If I receive you as a wolf, I turn you into a human being. If I receive you as a devious serpent, I turn you into a human being, not changing your nature, but transforming your free will. And St. Gregory goes on to say as well that when our lives are ruled rightly, our animal inclinations, our fears, our angers, our hunger, all of these things actually become the means by which we come to God. If our souls rule over our passions, then each of these passions becomes a form of virtue, says St. Gregory. Anger turns into not just a rage, but into courage. Terror becomes justifiable caution. Fear becomes obedience to God. Hatred of things becomes a hatred of sin. The power of love and the desire for others becomes a desire for what is truly good and for what is truly beautiful. So this man is depicted in the gospel then as someone who has been disordered, has been upside down, and Christ comes and turns him right side up. So, brothers and sisters, let us not use our minds and the souls that God has given us merely to find ways to make our bodies feel good. Don't spend hours of thought on what you are going to get, and this recalls the gospel lesson that we had from last week. Don't spend hours of thought on what you are going to eat, on what you are going to wear, on where you are going to live, on what color of paint you're going to get, whether to get the leather interior in your car. Don't use your mind simply to serve your body's comfort, or you will only be a really sophisticated animal. Instead, use your body that God has given you to serve your soul. Use your ears to listen to the beautiful hymns and music of the church that glorifies God, to listen to the teaching and the preaching of the gospel, to hear and to care for the sorrows of your brothers and sisters. Let us use our eyes to read things that illuminate our minds about who God is and what He's commanded us and who we are created to be, and to look about at the beauty and wisdom of the world that He has made. Let us use our mouths to pray, to sing in thanksgiving to our God, and to share the good news of love and of human freedom with others. Then, if we use our bodies in these ways, we will become what we were created to be, true human beings, whose bodies are offered by God, to God, by our souls in love and gratitude. Then we will cease being simply animals, but human beings, creatures that bridge the created world and the uncreated Creator. True human beings, offered to God, and so by grace, coming to be what our God is, by nature. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.